All right, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Federal Policy Update. My name is Carrie McDermott. I'm with mHealth, which is a nonprofit focused on lowering the cost of health care. And I'm very pleased to be joined by three leaders from federal agencies that are of particular relevance to the mobile health space. We have Julia Snap from the FCC, Bakul Patel from the USDA, and David Muntz from the Office of the National Coordinator. And what I've asked each of them to do is spend about 8 to 10 minutes each talking about what they've done across 2012 and what to expect in 2013. And without further ado, because we know we are the last thing between you and happy hour, I'd like to invite Julie Knapp to the podium.
Thank you, Carrie. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. I hope you all understand that dinner's not being served here tonight. So it's a fantastic turnout for this late in the day. So many of you may not deal with the FCC. I just have a few short slides telling you about the Federal Communications Commission, what it is we do, and what we have been doing in the area of mobile healthcare technology. So, see, I clicked it and it went nowhere. Let me try one. Here we go. All right. Red is backwards. I think we missed one. There we go. Yeah. So, for the FCC, our areas of responsibility include advancing both wireline and wireless communications, including a wide variety of uses in medical and medical-associated applications. We provide access to the airwaves for wireless medical devices and various radio services that support health IT. While at the same time, as you can imagine, the airwaves are packed with lots of different communication services, so part of our job is making sure that they all operate without causing harmful interference to one another. We're also engaged in a variety of actions and activities to facilitate health IT under the National Broadband Plan, and I should mention that Carrie was the leader in establishing the chapter of that plan that dealt with healthcare applications. So let's see, there we go. We have been doing a lot, actually, through the years in cooperating with other federal agencies, but I would say that's really been stepped up in the last few years. In 2010, the FCC and the FDA entered into an unprecedented partnership, working together to ensure the communications and related medical innovations can swiftly and safely be brought to the market. We signed a formal memorandum of understanding, and we held a 1.5-day joint public meeting that was an enormous success. We also meet regularly with the FDA staff to discuss on topics of mutual interest. And we've also participated in the National Institutes of Health mHealth Wireless Medical Technologies Working Group. They meet about once a quarter. And we've also been working with FDA and ONC on the FDA Safety and Innovation Act, which required the three agencies to create a report proposing a strategy and recommendations for an appropriate risk-based regulatory framework for health IT. And we're planning, with more to be said, about extensive stakeholder input into that process. We also coordinate routinely on spectrum matters with the National Telecommunications and Information Administration and its interdepartment Radio Advisory Committee. That's a mouthful. This is a group that is responsible for overseeing the federal government's use of the spectrum. And since so much of the spectrum is shared by federal use and non-federal use, we have to make sure that everything works together compatibly. So it's been a busy period in the last few years at the FCC relative to providing, in these cases, spectrum for medical applications. We had created the Medical Device Radio Communication Service, or MedRadio Service. I'll spare you going through the different frequency bands and the technical details. If you want to know more about it, just come see me afterwards. But we created this new service in 2009 by expanding the previous provisions for the medical implant communication service. We also provided in 2011 for medical micropower networks, and these are ultra-low power wideband networks that are implanted in the body that take the place of damaged nerves to restore sensation and mobility. We also granted a waiver for retinal implants to Second Sight in November of 2011. Another major proceeding that we had concluded earlier this year in 2012 was to provide spectrum for medical body area networks. These basically are networks of wireless sensors that are often no bigger than a Band-Aid that can transmit data on a patient's vital health indicators to their doctor or within a hospital. And one of the things that was really terrific about this case was the original request was to operate on spectrum that is used for aeronautical mobile telemetry. As you can imagine, as new aircraft are being developed, they have to be tested. This is both on the military side and on the private sector side, and they're trying to pick up very weak signals from a couple hundred miles away, and if they miss something and there's a problem going on, they really may miss an opportunity to avoid a very bad outcome. So when we started out in this proceeding, there was a lot of discussion about whether these low-power medical body area networks could share the same space on the airwaves with these aeronautical telemetry systems. And the terrific thing that happened is the two communities, after first arguing that it couldn't work, sat down together and figured out how to make them work. And so at the end of the day, we had a joint recommendation from all of the interested parties that the Commission had adopted. We did get a request to make some revisions to those rules, and that's pending, but it's really fine-tuning from here. And so it was an enormous success. We also are seeing a terrific growth in wireless applications that are running over the commercial networks. So a major area of focus for the Commission right now is with the explosion in wireless generally. The products that we're all using, the smartphones, the iPads and so forth, as well as what we generally call machine-to-machine communications, is placing an enormous demand on access to the airwaves. So a major focus for the Commission has been trying to identify more spectrum to accommodate the growth of those services as we move to the future. And that's really critical for medical as we've got new and novel applications that are being developed to run over the commercial wireless networks. They're going to need to make sure that they've got access to the airwaves as well. The FCC invited a number of parties to a mHealth summit this past June. It sparked the creation of an mHealth task force. It's an independent effort that brought together academic, industry, and government leaders to make recommendations to overcome barriers to the adoption of wireless healthcare technologies. I won't go through all of the sub-bullets, but they published a number of recommendations to the Commission, and the Commission has embraced them and has been working on a plan to implement them as well. One of the pending rulemakings that we have at the Commission would provide for revisions to our experimental licensing program. The whole idea of this program is to allow for innovators, companies to develop new ideas and try them out on the airwaves. In the health IT area, one of the concerns that you have is we've got a very complex, condensed environment in a healthcare facility where all of these devices that are trying to use the airwaves or might be susceptible to interference from other devices operating on the airwaves. It's very hard to predict the interactions that can occur there. So what we're trying to do in this proceeding is find ways to create program licenses for healthcare facilities where the new technologies can be tried out. So we're getting very close we've already issued the proposed rules. We've heard back from people as to the support for doing this, so we're getting close to recommending to the Commission a set of rules to provide for this. The last thing I'm going to talk about is the wireless medical telemetry service. This was spectrum that we provided on TV channel 37, which isn't used for TV, it's actually used for radio astronomy, and some other spectrum in the region of 1.4 gigahertz. That'll probably be the only technical thing I'll say. But, jumped. So, in the, what people often refer to as the Jobs Act that was passed earlier in this year, there was provisions to provide for incentive auctions in the TV spectrum. So the Commission had issued a proposal in September on how we might conduct an incentive auction, how we might reorder. That's interesting every time I touch this. Every time, so that how we might reorder the spectrum. The lead proposal would not affect the wireless medical telemetry that is in channel 37, but we also invite comment on, are there other ways that we could reshuffle the spectrum that might work out more efficiently for everyone. There was an amount of money that was provided in the bill that we could take from the incentive auction to cover relocation costs. So I would encourage, if you're at all have an interest in this, to look up the proceeding and participate. We just extended the comment period well into January and replies in March. So I know that's a major interest to the community. So I'll stop there and be happy to take your questions later. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, Julie. So at West Health, we spend a lot of time thinking about how do you give patients the right care at the right time wherever they are. And so we really appreciate the efforts of agencies like the FCC to ensure that there is ubiquitous wireless to enable that. Next, I'd like to invite Bakul Patel to the podium to give us some insight into where FDA has been and where it's going.
Okay. She's going to attack me in 10 minutes. So is that what you're saying? She said tap. I know. I'm sorry. So thank you for having me here. I think thank you for attending with so much participation at 5 o'clock. That's almost 5:15. So I won't keep you guys much longer. I want to take, oh, it really does flip slides if you touch it. So I'm not going to touch it. Here's what we've been trying to accomplish for the last 3 or 4 years, at least from my perspective, is truly trying to balance our mission of protecting and promoting public health. From that perspective, making smart policy decisions, focusing on things that would really affect not just from a patient safety perspective, but also beneficial from a patient perspective. So really trying to focus towards that aspect. And I can share with you a litany of things that's going on outside of the technology area and not just in software, but in other parts of the agency as well. And you saw the bill on FDASIA that got done last year with MARUFMA negotiations. That shows how much industry is engaged with us, and it was one of the biggest negotiations that we go through every several years for user fees. But all of them pointed out to efficiencies and trying to get our processes efficient enough that it actually helps patients in this country and provide access to technology in the space. So before Carrie attacks me, I'm going to move. Let me focus on software as an aspect. You can think of software, and the reason I'm talking about software as an aspect here is we're in this space of mobile, and majority of mobile applications that run on smartphones come in many different flavors. The agency, especially in the devices area, we've been looking at it from for many years in the software world. Software has increasingly grown as part of medical devices. Software becomes an accessory when it takes information from medical devices and uses it to do something else. And then you have standalone software where you take information from various aspects and you turn it into something that's useful for folks to cure, treat, mitigate, prevent disease. I left off one other thing that we look at software or we oversee software is in the production process. As you can imagine, when you're making, a stent or any manufacturing, there's a lot of automation that happens in industries that uses software. So some of the high-risk devices for implants and such, there's software that gets used in the making of those devices. So we oversee some of that as well. So just to share with you how the software world and the regulatory paths can actually overlap there. So I'm going to actually press that button. So in July 2011, we published the proposed guidance on mobile medical apps. We did get a lot of attention on this one, and I did get a lot of attention as well. So even today, I think I'm getting an average of an email a day, whether my app is a device or not. And why is it going back? So, magic. So it's timed, I guess. So we'll just work with that. Let me go back. Ooh, that's not good. So what we did in this proposal was we actually, to share with you, we had questions asked to us about what's a device, what's not a device. When it's a device, what is FDA's position on it? When FDA's position is, if it's a device, are you actively going to oversee? So there are folks on both sides of the camps wondering whether I'm going to be regulated or not. So that confusion led us to make that policy statement, a proposed policy statement in 2011, which said there are certain things that you may do may not even actually be a device. We sort of helped clarify that, and our intention was to clarify that. And there may be some things that are device, that meet the definition of a device under the law, but they're so low risk that we may choose not to oversee it actively. And then there's the very top of the pyramid, which I drew. It basically says, for those devices that we know as devices today, like the EKGs, the blood pressure machines, et cetera, that people need to have the same confidence as you have in an EKG machine or in a blood pressure cuff. We wanted to provide the same sort of confidence, level of confidence as you had before, even though now it appears on a smaller platform, a smartphone, or what handheld device that may come up in the future. So that was the approach and the thinking going into this. So last year, we received a lot of comments on that guidance. We worked on finalizing the mobile app guidance. We are not there yet. We're not out of the woods yet, but we are very close to publishing it. We also, in the process, we also found out there is two other major aspects in this connected world that makes things sort of questionable and raise questions. People may not understand how the regulatory approaches or FDA's position would be. And those are accessories to medical devices, not clear, and there's a lot of talk and a lot of concerns and questions where just touch or get data from device A, would I be regulated? So we are trying to answer that in accessory. The second part is taking information and turning it into something that would actually be used in curing, treating, mitigating, that meets the definition of a device. How is that looked at? And we are taking the same approach as we did with mobile apps. So again, same breadth of field. We are trying to figure out, and we are not finished actually working through this, is what are the high-risk sort of applications. And I've used this example in the past before. If you have a software that calculates radiation treatment therapy, would be at a different risk profile than actually telling you that two numbers compared over here on the one end is just telling you whether you have taken or you need to do something different in your weight or something else. So there's a spectrum of risk profile. We're looking at trying to focus on only things that would actually hurt patients at the end of the day, or lead to hurt patients at the end of the day if they didn't work as originally intended. So we are heading down that path. We are not completed our thought process on that. We are in the process of doing that. We also embarked on this. We have a draft guidance on wireless technologies and medical devices. We had not finalized that. That's something we are working today even to finalize that wireless guidance. Basically, it shares considerations, FDA's considerations when you put wireless technologies into medical devices. Over the last 9 months or 10 months or so, we've been trying to understand interoperability of medical devices with not just other medical devices, but also with information systems. How does that matter? It's becoming important enough for the agency to recognize that when devices get connected and information gets pulled in, how is it important, how it should work, what standards should be in place, and how data should be taken from point A to point B, so that at the end of the day, patient safety, we don't transpose information from A to B and so cause patient errors, but actually getting it right from the get-go. How do we do that? I think, so we've been sort of investigating, trying to find out what are the gaps, what can we do to help, how can we incentivize folks. I was unfortunately booked in another session that Mary Logan's running from AMI, talking about this topic of interoperability, and I had to send somebody else instead of me over there. And we had a summit with AAMI, which is Association for Advancement of Medical Instrumentation. Thank you, guys. Basically, that summit was to find out how, what are the gaps, where things need to be accelerated in interoperability. And it is important because at the end of the day, if you don't solve interoperability of data from devices or from other information systems, we are not making changes to our healthcare. We just in the process of finishing a study, internal evaluation. The last bullet is understanding how FDA evaluates software. And you look at the three categories plus the fourth one I mentioned, all four areas. Where do we stand? What's the right approach of doing it? So we're just in the process of doing that. And not just looking at us internally and saying this is what the process we have been doing, but also comparing it with other industries like DOD and FAA and other regulated industries to see what the best practices are so we can bring them and sort of make our staff or our skill, bench strength, and our processes lined up so it's tuned to where technology is heading. So we recognize it's an important topic for us. She's kicking me, so I'm going to go. Going forward, and we'll talk more about that in the Q&A, but here's where I see us going. We will continue to going down this pragmatic approach of oversight, not overseeing everything. We are in the process of finalizing mobile app guidance, mobile medical app guidance, and we should be doing that shortly. In the process of evaluating clinical decision support, and as Julie pointed out earlier, as part of FDASIA, FDA, FCC, and ONC will work with not only each other, but also folks in the stakeholder community and everybody to get the right input so that the framework for health IT, and we have to define how big or small that is, and we'll have to come up with a framework that takes a risk-based approach towards how we treat health IT from patient safety perspective going forward. So that's one of the things we are going to do in the coming year. I want to point out a couple quick things before I hand off the mic to Kerry. Just yesterday, we launched a public-private partnership. It's called the Medical Device Innovation Consortium. It's located in Minnesota. It's with the intent to advance regulatory science in the space of medical device technologies or medical technologies. One of the things we're looking at doing, and just to give an example, types of projects this public-private partnership will be doing, is to coming up with a model for human body or human organ or tissue and organs. So when medical devices or technology in medical devices needs to be validated or tested, they can go off the model. So it's really something that will advance technologies to be available faster, quicker, and maybe other areas. And we've talked about many other possibilities. Education in the medtech world. How can we accelerate that? What kind of force we need in the community? So we're looking at those kind of things, and it's not that we don't have other PPPs or public-private partnerships in place. This is very focused towards the medtech world and from public health perspective. We also released in the last couple of days is our strategic plan for CDRH for 2013. One of the things we're taking for very appropriate for this conference and this audience is we're looking at ways of how do we advance adoption of connected healthcare. And we chose those words very carefully, not to say mobile or E or C or something like that. We actually chose connected because it has a bigger meaning. It's not just a particular way of connecting. It's not a particular platform. It's actually how the ecosystem can support the regulatory framework, and the regulatory framework can support the ecosystem in the connected world as we move forward. So with that, thank you.
Thank you, Pakul. Certainly no shortage of activity, and we look forward to even more productivity in 2013. Next, I'd like to invite David Muntz, the Principal Deputy National Coordinator for Health IT, to the podium to share with us what ONC is doing.
I'm just finishing up my speech here.
Oh, that's good.
I really am going to go ahead and change what I was going to say today. The fact is that we've heard some great material, and what I'm going to do is rely on these gentlemen who are going to be the answer men, and I see my role as trying to be the question guy. So I'm going to try to involve us in a few questions as opposed to coming up with answers. And if you can hear me, can you wave at the back of the room? Okay, good. It always seemed foolish to ask, can you hear me? Because how would somebody know to respond to the question? I was asked today to do a little bit of environmental scan, and so I'm going to do that, but what I want to do is go to blank. What I want to do is go to next. And one of the things that is happening here, and you saw when somebody asked what AAMI stood for, collaboration is really the key here. And the fact is everybody has to be involved. This is not something that we're going to solve alone. We are not going to solve it as an industry. We're going to have to solve it as a society. And so we all have some kind of responsibility. The fact is we're all part of communities, and this is what that's all about. So one of the things that I was very impressed with is what happens in the government. I am new to the government, and I do have to tell you one quick story about my first introduction during the first 2 weeks I was here. And I've only been here 11 months, and I'm from Texas, so that will help explain a couple of things. But when Farzad Mostashari, my boss, came and said, let's go to the secretary's meeting, I thought, oh, well, how nice. They're going to go honor the administrative assistants. And I thought, oh, my God, this is not the same secretary that I'm used to talking to. And that was great, and they do introductions, and so there are about 16 chairs in the center, and then I sit in the cheap seats around the side.
I'm sorry, it's bouncing on its own. I'm giving that clueless help. AV, it's bouncing on its own, look.
We can turn this off. Okay. Whoops, maybe we can't turn it off.
I think you're finished.
Okay. Anyway, I'm introduced, and one of the things that happens is they say, hi, this is David Muntz. He's the new principal deputy. And so you sit down after saying a few words. The next time I go to the meeting, I'm there to represent Farzad, so I sit at the big table. And I sit next to a woman who's wearing a black suit, and she got some funny things on her arm. And I say, hi, my name's David Muntz. And she goes, yeah, you introduced yourself yesterday. She goes, my name is Regina Benjamin. And I said, so what do you do for the government? She goes, well, I'm Surgeon General. So it's like, oh, my God, of course. So I wanted to establish a reputation right off the bat because people like to help people who need additional assistance. And apparently y'all are going to have that same empathetic view as well today. So I appreciate that, but the fact is that what I tried to do on this slide was highlight the people who really are more engaged with mobile health. And it seems a little odd that you see the USDA down there. But the USDA is going to be responsible for helping us build out the infrastructure in the rural communities. And in staged, or in our requirements, if you don't have an adequate bandwidth, you're accepted from some of the requirements. And so 3 megabits is the minimum operating standard, and that's important. But one of the things that I find interesting about, and by the way, this is called, I'm just going to muse here a few minutes, and by the way, this is one of my favorite slides of all time. So when people ask me to talk about the future, I'm always reminded about this. It is certainly something that should be directed, but can't always be. Anyway, what I'll try to do is stick with a lot of letters today that all start with, or words today that start with all I-N, so it'll help me remind myself about what I want to say. But innovation is one of the things that I get asked about, and I have some responsibilities for standards. And so you may think I'm particularly biased, but I actually brought this bias with me from the private sector. But innovation is wonderful, and you can make 1,000 flowers bloom, and it's great. But innovation without standards is really not where you want to go. It's really chaos or noise. And part of the responsibilities that we have in the Office of National Coordinator is to help derive standards. And by the way, Continua is an organization that adopts existing standards. But the real trick to doing innovation is the ability to do what I think is critically important. And that is to be able to figure out how in a meaningful way to do interoperability. And by the way, I'm sorry I was distracted. One of the things I need to say as an introductory comment about musings is we talk a lot about meaningful use, and people ask me about meaningful use all the time. And what do you need to do to get to meaningful use? And my answer is that what you really need to do is forget about meaningful use. I know that sounds peculiar, but when Einstein was doing experimentation, one of the things that he said was that the most important part of the experiment was not the actual doing of the experiment, what was creating the situation where you were going to do it, creating the environment where you could actually conduct an experiment. So it's everything that occurs before you actually implement meaningful use. And the term I like to use is meaningful conversations. And that's the activity I think that we all should be engaged in, asking questions. And one of the things that's interesting here, I heard an awful lot of great discussion today when the ONC town hall was being held about who owns the data. And clearly the patient has the right to the data. But what happens is that a lot of meaningful conversation comes up, and we deal with a lot of very difficult questions. Well, that's... AV guys, can y'all just turn this off? That may be a little less distracting. Thank you. I appreciate that, and I know that y'all must appreciate that as well. Anyway, the innovation we have to have meaningful conversations about how we're going to apply things. The question is, okay, if the patient owns the data, then what does that mean for the patient? And one of the groups that I was asked to speak to early on in my role here was to AHIMA, and AHIMA is the American Health Information Management Association. I used to call those medical records people. They're now Health Information Management. But the first place I started was a hospital built in 1969. There was no medical records department because somebody had installed a computer. And in the 110-bed cancer and leukemia hospital that we had, every room had a monitor, every room had connections so you could do temperature, pulse, and respiration. And in 1969, there was no technology to do it. But the idea, the concept, was there. And so the question is, how long did it take to catch up? Well, it took about 7 years for it to catch up. And we were able to do some incredible, innovative things. But it always had to we had to figure out how to do things that applied to the patient. We kept that at the center. And so I've heard a wonderful lot of discussion today about keeping the patient at the center. And when we innovate, the question is, how are we going to create innovation in a way that fits together? Because if you create multiple things, you can have a lot of trouble. And one of the examples that's used is the railroad system in Australia. There are 3 different gauges for the railroads there. So Can you imagine what would happen if we had the same situation? And we do in healthcare. Everything is more expensive. You have to buy a certain kind of hip, or you have to buy a certain kind of this or that. And it's terribly expensive. So discussions about innovation need to be based on standards, and I think that's an important thing for us to focus on. I think, how are we doing time-wise? Okay, pretty close, okay. The other thing that we need to think about is the integrity of the data. And when we talk about mobile devices, I am concerned. And I'm concerned because what happens if you have an acute or a chronic condition, you're being monitored in a mobile situation, you walk out where there's no signal. What if the signal corrupts the data? How are you going to check that? And what we do in the hospital is we used to collect data, and we would have a caregiver review it in a suspense file before it was posted to the electronic health record. Well, what are you going to do when you've got a mobile device and the patients are generating the data? What are you going to do when the device goes down? What are you going to do if you don't have adequate bandwidth? And so a lot of very interesting questions that we should raise, and hopefully meaningful conversations can occur. The other thing that we talk a lot about, and I heard workflow mentioned, I can't even mention how many, I figure out how many times today we talked about it. But workflow really is just one portion of what we talk about. The patients don't necessarily work. They have lives. And so what I'd like to see us have a discussion about is life flow. That is, what are you going to do with mobile health devices that make the patient's experience in their life easier? The fact is that I have one of these little devices that I carry in my hip to measure how far I walk. It will interface with my computer. But at the end of the day, after walking whatever number of miles it is, I am so tired that the last thing I want to do is sit down and interface this device by using a cable to the PC that I have that's going to record and let me brag about how many miles I walked in a month. And so life flow is an important aspect of what we talk about. And I'd love to see that term be talked about more because it shows a sensitivity to the patient. And one of the things that always tickled me was people talk about you need work-life balance. Well, if we're really talking about it, it really should be you need life-work balance. And so I think that's critical. And finally, one of the things I think we need to talk about is intuitive activities. And the interfaces have to be intuitive. And if they're not, the adoption won't occur. And one of the things that's very interesting is when studies are done about whether people are willing to adopt our technologies or not, particularly mobile health devices, it's not literacy, it's not economics, it's not age, it's not education that makes the difference. The factor that is common among the people who refuse to adopt it is health literacy. And so we have a responsibility to teach people about health, not just the technology. And as technology people, we need to be very sensitive to that. So the idea is don't try to cross the digital divide, try to cross the medical knowledge divide. So with that, I will step down. Thank you.
Many thanks to each of you, and again, apologies for the AV. Appreciate your overcoming that adversity today. So in the spirit of meaningful conversation, we would like to open up a facilitated dialogue. I invite you to come to the microphones with your questions. If you don't bring questions, you will have to deal with my questions. And when you do come to the mic, please just give us your name, let us know where you're from, and if you could ask your question in a crisp manner, we will promise to answer crisply as well. And while folks are assembling, I'll just lob out one question for the group, which is that each of you is in a position to meet with a lot of different facets of industry. So if you could just talk to us about some of the major trends you're seeing and the struggles that you're hearing from people as it relates to mHealth. And if you're comfortable, we'll just go down the line.
Oh.
Sure. That requires Julie's comfort most of all.
I think the most exciting thing to me is all of the innovation that we're seeing. I mean, what we try to do at the FCC is provide opportunities for innovation to occur. So often that just means access to the airwaves. And we're seeing it across all fronts, I mean, both in terms of the kinds of devices. I spoke before about the body area networks and the medical micropower networks and so forth, and the sensors to assist with vision. And sometimes it seems like it borders on science fiction. And for us at the Commission, it's very fulfilling to feel that we can assist in some way in enabling these technologies to go forward. We're also seeing it with commercial wireless. I mean, we've met with some of the commercial wireless providers, each of which has got areas dedicated to machine-to-machine communications, and particularly in the healthcare field. And we talk about it generally, but when you meet with them and you see some of the things that people are developing and how they can change lives, we've been moving from, you probably have a better feel for it than I do, from the healthcare just being at a facility to being something that goes outside of what we normally think of, the hospitals, the clinics, and so forth, to provide care beyond that and into the home. And the potential of that for improving healthcare across the board is just enormous. So I think that's probably the most exciting thing that we see at the Commission.
So I would 100% agree with Julie. I think we're seeing a lot of activities, especially, at least what I engage in, is folks trying to engage patients in their own health, taking care of their own health. I see a lot of energy. For some reason, it seems like people are coming from all walks of life. And when I say people, it's not the individuals, but I'm talking about industry, from other industries, are stepping up and actually helping healthcare change from where it was to a new place. I think that's really what I'm seeing from a big, broad perspective. Is I see the IT folks, people who know how to deal with data, people who know how to create sensors from other industries, are all stepping up and creating sort of new, unique, and almost science fiction opportunities in healthcare. We are to see whether it all works out, because human body is not as simple as doing factory automation or something like that. But I think it's important to recognize that other industries are stepping in and providing their expert knowledge or knowledge from that perspective to solve some of the healthcare problems that we have or issues that we have. Engaging patients is actually standing out of the rest of the activities. I'm seeing a lot of activities in sensors, but also seeing very unique and innovative ways of how to engage patients. I was in a conference a couple of weeks ago, and I was just floored by the type of sort of projects people are working on to get people to make healthcare part of their life. I think to David's point is, health literacy is one, but just having mobile technologies and technologies to make healthcare part of their life is really what people are driving towards, which is what I'm saying.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, and I'll follow along because I certainly believe in it, and I've seen some disturbing statistics, and I do actually share them, and that's the patient engagement issue is to me the biggest issue. The fact is, people are challenging the value of what it is that we're doing with the rollout of health information technology. So if you don't mind, by a show of hands, if you've had a good experience or know somebody who had a good experience with an electronic health record, would you raise your hand and leave it up? Okay, if you know somebody who had a bad experience with an electronic health record, will you raise your, you don't have to raise your other hand if you've already got one up. Okay, now, how many of you, the instructions were you got to leave them up here. Come on, got to help me out here. I need a little, after not getting technical assistance, I expect the analog devices in the room to act properly. Okay, now, how many of you have published either a blog, a peer-reviewed journal, or some article about your experience? Okay, this is the issue that I think we have. And if we don't figure out how to tell the stories, either via anecdote or by evidence, then I'm not sure that we're going to be able to take advantage of all the innovation that is occurring, and I don't think we're going to get people engaged. And when people are worried about what to do for the future, they look at the things they don't understand and rank them lower. And when a recent study came out, it ranked the adoption of IT less than I would have wanted it to be. And I think it's because people don't understand. And so this is the group that's passionate about what's going on. We're in the industry. We love healthcare. We love IT, or we wouldn't be here. And so I think we have a responsibility to the community to try to get people actively engaged. And so I would strongly encourage you to do this. Now, we've all done it for our families. And we all know families who haven't done this, and so I would talk this up. This is the holiday season. Regardless of which party you go to, come up with some kind of cocktail story, an anecdote that you can share that will get people fascinated about this. And if you don't, email me and I'll help you make something up. Because I do believe that we do need to get people engaged. And only when we have everybody in the community playing a part do I think we will be successful.
Great. Thank you. Creative ideas. We have a question from the audience.
My name is John Birch. I'm here, I'm a private investor, an angel investor, and I'm here looking at this space, as they say, because entrepreneurs have asked me for some wisdom and maybe some financial help. A year or two ago, the government, in its wisdom, enabled 40 million new people to take advantage of the healthcare system in our country. It did nothing in that same act to create one additional physician. Therefore, the most important driving force in healthcare today is to make physicians more productive. Probably the number one way to do that is by providing automated software, automated algorithmic medical software that helps with decision support, diagnostic decision support. Obviously, my question is directed to the man from the FDA. You're from the government, and you're here to help. Can you do anything to fast-track the developments that you're working on for such software?
Absolutely. I think we recognize the urgency from not only from a need perspective of having it out there, but also from a safety perspective. I think what we are looking for, and if I got it wrong before, I'll correct it now, is we would like such technologies to be there in the marketplace, not just at the marketplace, but also at the provider. And interestingly enough, the paradigm is shifting. It's not just the provider anymore, it's you and me as individuals. So we want those clinical decision support to be available to folks like you and me at the same level, maybe not at the same sort of criticality as a provider would do, but so what we are interested in figuring out is what parts of those such software that helps in diagnosis or treatment does actually need oversight, where there's nobody else being able to detect a problem if that were to occur. So that's really what we're focusing on. That's the opposite of saying not having products out there, but it's actually having more products out there.
So are you doing anything to fast track or to provide waivers for software that may already exist? What are you doing to expedite the development of this kind of software?
So absolutely right. So as part of looking at a policy towards in that area is actually considering those things which are already out in the marketplace, which are actually helpful. People are societies and other entities are already looking at this and vetted it. So
what sort of
Thank
process?
Thank you for your question. I think we'll probably take that one offline. I know we do have other dialogue. I don't want to make it just an FDA discussion. I'd like to open this up. Thanks. I think, but this does bring up what we can do more broadly about health IT regulation. So we talk about that. We've all mentioned Section 618 out of the FDA Reauthorization Act. So when we think, what is appropriate health IT regulation, what does that mean to you? And what do you see as the process for driving at that? And then how can the folks in this room help with that and engage in that process?
So we are in the process of looking at best way to engage with the broad stakeholder. We understand very clearly from, Julie and David can speak to this, but we're looking at ways and really creative ways of engaging with people, given the full understanding that it is a broad area, and there's a lot of stakeholders, there's a lot of benefits of technology helping not only providers but also patients at the end of the day. And it's a work in progress, so I'm not sure we have a crisp answer, but this discussion, and I would like to hear more about what other ways, and leveraging mHIMS and other avenues like that, such as mHIMS, would be something that we would be looking at.
Can I take a little shot at just a kind of a glancing blow at this? But one of the things you ought to be asking yourself when you come up with these questions, hopefully in your meaningful conversations, is WWPD. What would paper do? Because there are an awful lot of things that we've already resolved on paper that are policy issues. For example, who owns the data? That has been answered many times, and it's a paper-based solution. And the question is, how can we take the paper-based solutions and then apply them in the electronic world? And when I try to explain to people what we're trying to do, it really gets back to the thing that we should all keep in mind, and as the three-part aim. We want to help the patient, we want to help the population, we want to figure out ways to support more efficient ways and support new models of care. And there are many things that precede the implementation of hardware, software, that contribute mightily to the improvement of outcomes in healthcare. And the basic example of a clinical decision support activity that's already in paper and then just has to be automated is standardized order sets. Okay? When I was in another facility, we saw a particular rate of mortality when you had pneumonia on admission. When you let people use their own order sets, you had a statistically significant drop in the mortality rate. When you asked the institution to get together and as a community decide what was the best type of care, you saw a statistically significant drop from what was there previously. And so just the process of asking what's the best way to do medical things was important. And then the deployment of the electronic health record was really just a way to hardwire the three-part aim. And it's taking these processes, it's not necessarily creating new software, it's using the software that you have in innovative ways to ensure that you get repeatable results. And I hope that's somewhat responsive to a couple of the questions were asked.
Yeah, well, I'll just say a little bit, maybe at a little different angle. When we talk about appropriate regulation, and granted the FCC does not have expertise in the healthcare side. I mean, we're all about...
Don't sell yourself short.
Right, enabling the technology. But so much of this depends on the partnership between the private sector and the industry. I mean, when I look at, for example, in the commercial wireless side, for those of you who aren't familiar, so we provide the space on the airways for the commercial wireless carriers to deploy service, but we don't tell them what technologies to use. And what that enables them to do is develop the standards. There's standards bodies that develop all of this so that they can work together. And so we leave, a big chunk of this has to be from the private side, I would say, and that's important to keep in mind. What we are trying to do is set a regulatory framework that really is basic enough that we don't have to come back every year or 2 years and restart another rulemaking to enable the latest technology. We're trying to create an environment that will stimulate investment by setting basic rules of the road and then letting the parties just go forward and innovate.
Thank you. Your question.
Well, I was going to respond to the comment or the question that was raised about can we do differently to increase patient engagement. And I'm Carla Denise Edwards, the Bay Company, Zero Divide. And I think one of the things that we can do differently to facilitate patient engagement, and I said this in the earlier session, is to begin the dialogue outside of ourselves. And so in these conferences, we're talking to ourselves. The folks that are actually providing care or seeking care are not participating. So the value proposition that we all recognize is not being fully communicated outside of the walls of the Gaylord or wherever else we have a meeting. I think it's really important in thinking about what you were just saying about the FCC's venue is how do we transform and take the message to the folks who can actually implement the change in the culture and the behavior. And so I've shared with a couple people about the concept of having, pre-conference workshops at meetings of those who are actually doing this work, whether they're promotores, community health workers, folks who are working in human resources and cultural competence, whether it's physician groups or clinics, or even just the NAACP or the United Methodist Church. How do we get the message to them so that the value of the e-health, mobile health, can be realized? It could be as simple as an old-fashioned public health campaign, right, where the FCC opens up and gives us some free airtime to talk about and communicate the value of having e-prescribing, or the value of being able to schedule a doctor's appointment online. You know, if you start with the small stuff, because most people don't really care about their data, they just want the practical applications of technology that they use for banking and making reservations and all that other stuff to apply to their healthcare transactions. And so my recommendation is thinking about having a meeting or a conference with people who can actually take the message, get the value, and then transpose and share that value with folks who are on the ground.
Great. Thank you for that suggestion. Are there any other questions from the audience? Oh, here you go. Please.
Yes, Michael Mulvihill, CEO of Orcus, and my question is that as we refocus ourselves towards the improvement of health and wellness and well-being, and take a more preventative approach, is it clear that preventative programs, prevention of hypertension, prevention of depression, is it clear that those do not fall under treatment and diagnosis? Have you guidance in those areas?
Sure. The statute actually is very broad in terms of, and actually uses the words cure, treat, mitigate. There's the level of intervention and the type of intervention that matters. And one of the things we've done traditionally is the type of intervention will allow or actually make FDA regulate products in a certain way. And we have this class 1, class 2, class 3 approaches, basically saying that if your intervention is in general behavior or healthcare, lifestyle, or lifestyle, not even healthcare, is something in the general wellness portion of the change of prevention. Whereas if you're preventing, if there's a claim or if there is a product which says we are going to prevent heart attack, that's a different type of product that you would look at, and we would look for validity on that, as opposed to saying walk 10,000 steps a day will actually prevent. It's been shown that it'll prevent heart attack and it will lead to a better lifestyle. So it gets important to sort of understand where the intervention is suggested by an application or a product or whatever. If it's a lifestyle sort of intervention, that's something that we, even if it meets the definition, we would not be extremely interested in overseeing it, and to the fact that the risk posed by things not working is already well known and it's low enough, if that makes any sense.
Thank you.
Next question.
Hi, Harry Greenspan from Deloitte. Quick question. We were at a session last night talking about children and other underserved communities, and I'm just curious how each of you view sort of the paradox of many communities have no access to mobile, or other communities that are underserved. The prime way of reaching those communities is through mobile, and I'm interested in how each of you is dealing with the problem of underserved communities.
Thank you.
Well,
Not all at once.
I'll just give you personal experience, and this is from observation, not from evidence, but we used to do delivery of meals on wheels in the community, and the one thing there were 3 things that people had in their house. They had a couch, a TV, and a cell phone. And so cell phone technology, I believe, is really significant. There are studies that have been done in Africa with populations where you give cell phones to people and to mothers, and it ensures an incredible, the evidence was overwhelming in terms of what it did for the birth rate and the health of the babies and lowering the cost. So, and microloans were used actually to get the phones out. So I think mobile is the way to do it, because the telecom companies are not distributing the wire the broadband in the areas where it doesn't make good economic sense. And you can't blame them for that. They've got an incredible responsibility to all of the community, and they do the best they can, but it still doesn't provide enough coverage. And the other issue, and I'm not trying to make any judgments here, is the transitory nature of many of the people who live on, in underserved communities, and the ability to track them. But the geo-positioning capability of the cell phone is a huge advantage. The initial investment significantly cheaper. You don't have to run wires out endpoints in all of the homes. And so I think that mobile health is probably most promising for that particular population. And so I'm encouraged by the activities that are going on in this particular area. So.
One of the things we looked at, especially when we did the mobile medical apps guidance, is looking at the benefits. I think there's a lot more activity, and we've noticed there's a lot more activity going on in actually providing, and I'm going to use David's health literacy word, and it's purely informatory from that perspective. And if I were to, my personal opinion is, if I were to guess, those people in the underserved communities actually will be more benefited with that kind of information on hand, which cell phones are part of their life, even though they may not have fast broadband, but they all have smartphones or some sort of phones that help them communicate. And one of the things we've looked at is there's a lot more benefits in this area for us to even oversee, and going back to the benefits risk paradigm, is making sure that are allowing 1,000 flowers to bloom in this underserved area, but also in this application space and intervention space, which is overall beneficial. So I think we've taken that approach holistically.
So I'll just comment on something that the FCC is doing that is not the area that I'm involved in, and that's our rural health care and lifeline projects, which are designed to offset some of the costs involved in providing service to folks who may not have the means for these kinds of services or into rural areas. So it's handled actually out of our Wireline Competition Bureau. I know they've continued to work on it. I'm certainly not an expert on it, but there is a program to try to support those activities.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, so question? I was going to call final questions. There we go.
Thanks. Well, hopefully this will be quick. I'm
Sure.
Jim Zabin. I'm actually with Wiley Ryan, the law firm here in D.C., and chair of the FDA practice group. And our firm actually has one of the largest FCC practice groups as well. So we help clients in both these areas separately and as they intersect. And one thing that I think everybody here and you guys recognize is dealing with regulatory agencies that can be a gatekeeper to your marketing is difficult and can be very time consuming. Here in this space, we've got an emerging situation where there may be two agencies. There are two agencies, both your agencies, that are sort of dual gatekeepers. And I know you have the MOU and have had meetings and so forth. But I'd like to hear sort of maybe a brief description of what you are expecting and hoping to do to make it that it's not going to be double the amount of time and effort to get relevant products to market, given the two agencies involved. What have you foresee in terms of streamlining when you've got sort of twice the oversight? Thanks.
Can I take that first?
Yeah, I'll take a shot. We have two programs with different objectives. And one of the things that happens for us, aside from having the access to spectrum and a set of rules for products to be developed under, is the product approval process. And almost all of the products today are actually certified through a private sector body. So that can be pretty quick. It can be, as short as a few days or a few weeks. And our processes don't have to be sequential. I mean, this can all go on in parallel. So our responsibility is relative to ensuring that the products are not going to interfere. We also have RF safety provisions that to make sure that the products are going to meet the health standards. But It's a pretty quick process and pretty straightforward, I think.
So if I may add to that, if you can think about just the product life cycle, if somebody thinks about putting wireless technologies in their, pick a device, it needs to go through FCC to make sure that what Julie just mentioned, is it safe, it does not interfere, et cetera, et cetera. That's so far ahead of getting the product to market. It's almost in the engineering stage of the development. Whereas when it comes to FDA, we are looking for safety to patients and making sure the products are not going to hurt somebody. So if there's a product that just uses communication technologies to share information, what they have inside the product, that's usually not the very big focus, unless you're using RF to actually burn something or cauterize something in your tissues. That's a different story completely. But if you're using communications is just one component of the whole big picture of what the devices does for, I'm just giving pacemaker as an example. Pacemaker does the pacing function. And the communications from that pacemaker is actually one of the components, the very small components of it. And by the time people come to FDA, it's usually certified and tested to FCC standards, and they already have the label in place. So the processes and programs are far enough, and I shouldn't say it applies to everything. There are some cases where it does overlap a little bit, but that's the typical scenario where the processes and the engagement with agencies is like far enough that it does not, at least from my perspective, does not interfere in almost 90% of the time.
I mean, I would just add, too, that as we go into the next year and we start talking to the community, one of the things that occurred to us is just how important it is for us to explain to people what it is that we do, what it is that FDA does, so they can understand how the pieces fit together. And at least from our perspective, there's very little overlap, but we'd be happy to talk about these things as we go forward.
Great. Thank you. Last question.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Laura with Zero Divide. And I just wanted to ask a follow-up question or have a comment related to the question about the underserved communities. And I'm wondering if it might be a good idea to actually connect with agencies like the NTIA and the Broadband Technology Opportunities Program and some of the things that they've been doing, because they have specific programs related to technology adoption in underserved communities. And I know you talked about the National Broadband Plan, and there's a specific section in that plan specifically related to getting access to underserved communities. So looking at issues around infrastructure, but also the whole the adoption strategy. So I think that's another connection that could be made within the federal government.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great. So please, you guys have been a wonderful audience. We appreciate you hanging in there with us. Please join me in thanking our panel.